In a one-employment town. So Vauxhall Motors employed 40,000 people in the 70s. The population was 120,000, so almost everybody worked there. Yeah.
And you went through a posh schooling because your parents made some sacrifices.
Yes, some sacrifices. At this point, Michael, I always tell the audience that my education was funded by marijuana.
So what's marijuana?
Marijuana is that thing you smoke too much of, Michael.
I've never touched it. Never touched
you might know it as ganja.
Right. I was once stopped in the street in Finsbury Park by a guy who said, "You want charge?"
Oh, yeah.
And I said, "Sorry? What's charge?"
You know,
I've never found
you know what it means?
I do
like
now.
charging for battery.
Yes, I do now. That's right. Never anyway, sorry, I interrupt. Carry on.
So I'm 10. Imagine I'm 10.
Yes.
I'm 10 and I have good brains. And my parents are feeding me all the fish that they can, but it's not going to work because I'm destined for the failing state school, it's called Rotherham, closed down in the 70s. So they're right. And so my mum says to Bad Guy, my father, who has terrible bags under his eyes, permanent bags under his eyes,
Can't imagine.
beautiful look, says to Bad Guy, we must scrimp and save and send this boy to a private school so we can get some education. And at the time, my mother's not working at Vauxhall Motors then, she does it later, but at the time there's only one wage coming in, and at that time there were 5 children. And so Bad Guy reckons the only way he can come up with the school fees is to sell marijuana.
This magical substance.
Yeah, so I'm his bag man, so we bag a little sort of bleaching powder sachets of marijuana and we drive around Luton dropping it off.
And you're about 11 at this
10,
point.
11, yeah. And so that was the kind of the genesis of why I would one day end up talking to you on this wonderful stage.
Yeah.
But for marijuana, I would not be here.
With a posher voice than me. Yeah.
This is the Luton voice. What are you talking about? Yeah. So I got to the school. I was very lucky to go to the school because it was run by American monks. It's in St Albans. It's got a leafy suburban commuter town. And it was run by the Brothers of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And
Should I cross with you when you do that? My one goes spectacles, testicles, white and white.
North, south, east, and west, I think. But I was very fortunate because they're Americans, and this is when I went to the school, it was in the early 70s, and there was still this kind of backwash of the civil rights movement. And so they actually felt bad about what had been done in their name towards black people in America. So they treated me, and my brother also went to the school, very, very kindly. And after a while, newsflash, Michael, marijuana selling doesn't pay after a while because you're going to get caught. So after a while, that guy got caught, and the police came, raided the house, dug up the garden, rifled through the house. Miraculously, he never went to jail, got a big fine. But soon after then, my mother's so ashamed about all of that business, she couldn't turn a blind eye to it, in all honesty, because he was doing good. It was getting me to be able to sit with you 40 years later. She showed him the door. And so I remained at the school, but the money had run out. And whenever the bursar would send a note back to Mrs. Grant, Ethelyn, my mum, more or less saying, you're late with the fees again, my mother would write back immediately, and she'd say to the bursar, remember the Catholic, what would Jesus do?
Very good.
So I had a free private school education for a number of years.
Yeah. Thanks to Jesus.
Thanks to Jesus. Praise the Lord!
Yeah. Excellent. And can we just jump ahead to a little episode that I did wince the way you describe it. So this is the first waltz story that comes later. So this is your passing out when you are head boy. We're looking at head boy, please, everybody.
Head boy material.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
I was actually the head boy at junior school as well.
double whammy.
And before that, I was an altar boy for 7 years.
That's a lot of stuff there, actually. I had no idea. I didn't even know you were head boy till I read the book.
purely establishment material.
Yeah.
From the word go.
Mind you, it sounds a bit racist, head boy, doesn't it?
Do you know what? The other thing is that when these American monks, they'd be replenished. That's right. They'd be, you know what I mean?
Monk replenishment, yeah. It's a well-known process.
They'd come and go, and they'd go back, and they got better with this normal. They go back to Louisiana or somewhere, and so there'd be a new monk who'd come over, and there was the monk that came from, I think he came from New Orleans, and he specialised in shouting across the courtyard. And I said, "Boy," he said, "Hey, boy!" And I said, "That's not nice." And he pretended he was saying head boy, but he wasn't. He was saying hey boy, like, you know, you're from the south, you're not quite a human being, actually. You may be head boy, but you're just a Y.
We know it from In the Heat of the Night, if nothing else. Yes.
So, but there was a moment in this wonderful school, St. Columbus College, Sidney Poitier, manicured fingernails. They call me Mr. Tibbs. Very important moment in that film where it was being introduced by this racist cop, played quite well by Rod Steiger. And this racist southern cop says, "What do they call you, boy?" And he says, "They call me Mr. Tibbs."
That's good. That's good. That's good culture, that is. That's good.
So there's a tradition, when you're a head boy, there's a kind of dance. You're invited to this wonderful dance. You get to be on the head table, you know, the high table and stuff. And then the previous head boy is there as well with his parents. And the tradition is that the father of the previous head boy had to dance with the mother of the current head boy. And my mother went with her friend Anne Hegarty, because Bagay wasn't around, she wouldn't invite him anyway. And I think that the previous head boy's father looked at my mother and saw this, what he might have imagined, a poor working class black woman, and just took fright. And he wouldn't dance with her. And I was just mortified, actually. And it stayed with me until I finished writing this book, actually. That moment, yeah, that moment of shameful moment where he did not do the right thing. And I suffered the humiliation that my mother suffered. I had a kind of a feeling of associative suffering for her. And I thought it was a disgraceful act. And I never quite forgave him.
Well, and then she gets up and dances with Anne Hegarty.
Anne Hegarty, yeah. So Anne Hegarty's, all my mother's friends, apart from the Caribbean people, were Irish. So we grew up in this Irish estate.
Irish bingo players, you.
Yeah. They're all Glynns or Loughlin's, McLaughlins or Hearns. So Anne Hegarty stood up and did the right thing by my mother, and all power to her. It's quite a difficult thing to write about, actually, because I just could not believe that my mother could be humiliated in this way by this. Paul would call them inferior people. Didn't know that his superior was a woman who refused to take her hand.
Yeah. Let's jump ahead. We meet your sister, who, can I say, some estrangement between you and Sister Selma, also mysteriously called Salome. Is that right?
Correct.
Possibly dubbed herself Salome at some later stage?
Yes.
Why not?
Yes. Well, she entered into the advertising profession where they make up stuff, don't they? She remade herself as a woman not coming from a working class family of Caribbean migrants in Luton, but she became
a beheaded maiden.
A Ghanaian or Nigerian princess.
Why not?
Yeah. So years later, I was in a radio studio meeting, talking about a book I'd written called Back Out the Wind, in which she appears.
Back Out the Wind. It's
here. And it transpired that I was sat beside someone who'd worked with someone called Salome. And as I was talking to him, it was clear that it was my sister he was talking about. But he couldn't commute. He couldn't understand what I was saying, because the woman I was describing, in his mind, was this African princess. And he just refused to believe that it was the same person. So she quite wisely decided that she must get away from the ogre of my father, Agai, and she transformed herself. She underwent a kind of Hollywood transformation. And the reason for the slight estrangement is because she didn't want her story to be complicated. She didn't want to be outed as being other than the way that she presented herself to her Saatchi friends. So we were the skeletons in the cupboard, as it were,
yes,
who could reveal that she wasn't who she said she was.
Okay, so also we have the figure of your father, who is quite dominant in the book as a whole, but you've got one chapter devoted to him. In fact, one of the phrases I think either Selma or you use is Jack and the Beanstalk. The idea that he's the giant upstairs, because at some point I think he's demoted upstairs, as it were.
Well, did you not have that with your parents? I mean, you had a kind father. You had a kind father, so you probably didn't have that. But our father, he didn't really want. He fathered 7 children. But I write in the book, my sister Selma, who's very sharp, she said he paid as much attention to the fathering of his children as a man does when he blows his nose into a handkerchief. That was what he did. And then on to the next one. Pay no attention to what he's going to do with these things, just discard them. So he didn't really want to be a father, so he would confine himself to the top of the house. So he was the giant at the top of the house, and the stairs were the beanstalk. And we would try to loosen the carpet on the stairs so that he would trip and break his neck. And we would grind up. You can kill a fly with fly killer paper. The kind of gluey poison. We'd kind of peel that off and put it into his coffee and hope that he would drink it and become poisoned. But come the day, he would never pick up that coffee, and he would always skip the dodgy step. It's like he had some sort of intuition that we were out to get him. I remember saying to one person, because he wasn't a very pleasant man, my father, that for many, many years after he'd gone, I lived in fear that he would die before I had a chance to kill him.
Can we just leave us a pause while we think about it? Yes. And he was violent.
Yeah, he was violent. Yeah, but it's kind of interesting. I had when I wrote about the previous book, Bad Guy at the Wheel, I had a strange review in the TLS, the Times Literature Supplement, and the review was kind of complaining that it wasn't violent enough, and it wasn't sad and miserable enough. And I made a point of not painting in the broad brushstroke violence, because that's what's expected. I wanted to be sort of quiet violence. So I thought there was violence. And there's one moment, can I tell the story? There's one moment in the book, and I'll tell it again in this story. I tell it, you know the way that Hilary, not that I'm going to compare myself to Hilary Mantel, but you know the way that Hilary Mantel might tell the same story but from a different perspective in her book. So I do that sometimes with my stories. I've really got to find out my own stories, so I've got to recycle some of these stories occasionally. So there's this moment, my sister Selma is, that's not her real name, I changed her name. My sister Selma she wouldn't want to be known, and she wouldn't want me to speak her name. You know that moment when Will Smith says to, what's his face, the comedian, Chris Rock, take my wife's name out of your fucking mouth. Yeah. So my sister wouldn't want me to mouth her name.
We've avoided that.
So she calls Selma in the book. So she's 14 and she's smart. She's in Jamaican culture, they say she's forthright. Which, do you know that phrase?
Well, I do now, I've read the book.
So, anyone know forthright? So, you know...
Forthright tomatoes, green, and you make them red by putting them in whatever you do.
So she's older than her chronological years. She's more mature than she ought to be for the amount of years she's lived. And so she susses this guy as bully, inferior bully, bad guy, intimidated by my mother, intimidated by my mother's family. And he is intimidated by Selma. My father's intimidated by Selma. She does her own stuff. She's reading Harold Robbins, The Betsy, weird book. And she's growing her nails, ready for a party. And she's saved up money to buy the nail polish. And on one day, she must have said something to him the night before, and he's not forgotten it. And this afternoon, she's polishing her nails, and he comes down, the giant comes down the beanstalk, and he looks at her, and he says, "Where you going with them claw? Them claw, where you going with them claw?" And he gets her hand, in his hand, he gets a pair of scissors, and he cuts up all the nails in her fingers. And I thought, violence enough. There you have violence, there you have domination. You don't need to go any further. So that's the approach I take in generally. I like to have sort of subtle examples rather than the big, broad, knock them on the head with the mouth.
Beautifully told.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's come. So you go off to the London Hospital. You're at the medical school there, and one character we meet He's a kind of street figure, really. I think I can call him a schizophrenic.
Yes.
Can I? Is that right? Yes. Herman.
Herman Harcourt. Yes.
Yes. And this is an extraordinary encounter. It seemed to me you were meeting somebody that you kind of feared that you might become.
Exactly, yeah.
So tell us a bit about your encounters with Herman.
So I'm at medical school at the London Hospital, and you have to do various attachments, 3 months stints in various disciplines. The most attractive one was actually obstetrics and gynecology, because we were taught by a brilliant woman called Wendy Savage. And when Wendy Savage greeted us in our first year, she said, "Put away your Grey's Anatomy." Grey's Anatomy is the big Bible. You were at medical school, weren't you?
I was, and I also know Wendy Savage.
Did you do dissection?
I did, yes. I dissected. Anyway, yeah, I won't go on.
Who was it you dissected?
We did give a name, like you gave yours a name. Yes, you're not supposed to do that, by the way, but we did. Yes.
So Wendy Savage was great because she said, "Put away your Grey's Anatomy. I've got the 2 books for you, Colin, Michael. Jermaine Greer's Female Eunuch and Erica Young's Fear of Flying." And we were just, oh, weird. I loved Wendy Savage, actually. She's part of why I'm here as well. And I loved her writing, she's a great writer. But anyway, we had to go and do psychiatry. So I went to St Clement's Hospital in Mile End, and you do what's called specialing. You do one-to-one kind of nursing in a way. You look after one patient. And I was charged with looking after this man, Herman Harcourt. He was a Caribbean man, and he was a Latin scholar. He was very bright. And he was from Antigua, I think. And he was about 50, and something had gone wrong. Maybe all the pressure of what was expected of him had tripped something in him, and he was now sectioned. And then when the section finished, he didn't want to leave the hospital because he became an agoraphobic. So my task was to walk with him, first for 100 yards and then back to the hospital, next day 200 yards, next day a mile. And I was embarrassed by him, in all honesty. Because he was a shambolic figure, and there's this thing about, maybe in Jewish culture you have it as well, in a bella figura, I know it's an Italian phrase, but the idea that you show your best face to the world, and you're not just representing Colin, you're representing the people, man. And so Herman was letting down the side, not, you know. So I didn't really want to.
You mentioned he had rotting maggots in the turn-ups of his trousers.
Yeah, that didn't help. It wasn't a quick look. So initially I was kind of antipathy towards him. Because I was 19, 20, and I didn't really understand mental ill health. But as I got to know him, and he was kind of like a cartographer or a psychogeographer, he knew all around the East End. We'd have long chats. He was very philosophical, and he had been a scholarship boy. He hadn't got the Rhodes Scholarship, but he'd been denied the Rhodes Scholarship, but he got some kind of scholarship akin to that. And I saw, actually, I was a bit wobbly. At that time, because I should never gone to medical school. Probably better like you. I should never gone. I was trying to fulfill the dreams of my parents, and they invested so heavily in me, just not only with the ganja and the money, but also emotionally. There was a lot riding on my shoulders. So I was sticking it out, but I saw myself in him. I thought, there, by the great grace of God, go I.
And somebody says to you, they give you a sort of percentage count. There's this rather brutal lecturer who says how many people of Caribbean origin, that wasn't his phrase, I think,
no.
how many Jamaicans or something are going to end up being schizophrenics. And then when you challenge him, he says, well, that's the way it is. Like it's a fact.
Well, and then he explains why 6% more is the figure. Young Caribbean men and women develop schizophrenia. And he says, do you want to know the reason why, Michael? I'm saying to Michael, you're me.
Yeah, I'm Colin. Yeah.
He says, black people are schooled in paranoia.
So this is a professor?
Professor of pathology at the London Hospital. Black people are schooled in pathology, in paranoia. And what he's saying is that you think people are after you. And there's good reason why you do think that. Because your parents tell you that you're being watched. My father was saying all the time, you're being watched. You're being watched to see which way you turn, to see whether you conform to the man, British people's idea of you, being feckless, work shy, destined for a life of crime. You're being watched. So you've got this idea that you are under surveillance all the time. And we felt that we were under enemy occupation, actually. So in a way, he was right. We were schooled in thinking that actually they're out to get you. And sadly, I think there's an element of truth in that.
Well, in fact, one of the themes that you return to in the book is the idea of being positioned and whether you fight the positioning or not. That's how I felt it. That all these various characters coming at you from the outside world, not just family, sort of positioning you, and you wondering whether you are in that position or not.
Yeah.
So there's, I mean,
it's a strange dissonance that arises. I mean, I didn't probably express any of this to you when we were working together.
Well, we did used to have interesting chats in the
But do you
bush
think I
house
was
canteen.
masking? Do you think?
Did I think you were a mask?
Do you think I was? There was a veil. Do you think you got the real Colin? I mean, people know me now. I think, you knew how to write. You had dreams of writing.
Well, you used to tell me every lunchtime.
I know you.
You used to say every lunchtime, I want to be a writer. I don't want to be a bloody BBC producer. So I said, well, don't get out and write.
You're spoiling my story, Mike.
All right, well, maybe it's all right, but
No, you. Okay, so you. But
I wasn't a producer. I was just coming in as just layabout to do programs.
Well, no, you were kind of akin to a Caribbean man. That's what I was thinking. You're like one of us, you know.
That's
my
very
mother
kind
used to
of
say
you.
to me, and I'm being honest now. My mum used to say to me, find your people. You know, through life, look for your people. You'll find them. Clean your glasses. You are my people. You're my peeps. But a lot of people weren't my people, and I didn't know whether they could be trusted. You know the reason why all these Caribbean people have these nicknames? So my father's called, I'm sorry for Desiree, who's heard me say this before, and my wife and my daughter's heard me say it 1,000. I'm going to
tell them not to come next time. It's all right.
So when I'm growing up, we didn't have a television until 1972. The television, the entertainment were the Caribbean people that I grew up with, all these amazing characters. They're like the characters in Sam Seldon's The Lonely Londoners. I thought they were the source material because they were sharp, man, and they all had style. You can't take away style. You can starve someone, but you can't take away their style. You can deny them employment, they're going to have style. You say you can't work it, they're going to pull the collar up and they're going to walk on by. So these guys, bad guy has permanent bags under his eyes, subcutaneous edema from the age of 16. He's a merchant seaman, some wag calls him bad guy, it sticks. He hates the name, but he has to live with it. Shine is bald, like me. Pumpkinhead has a pumpkin-shaped head. Anxious is always very anxious. Tidy Boots has a thing about shoes. Clock has one arm longer than the other. And my all-time favourite was Summerwear. So when Summerwear came to this country from Jamaica in 61, 62, he insisted on wearing light summer suits, no matter the weather, come rain or storm. And in the course of writing about these characters, I asked my mum whatever happened to Summerwear. And she said, well, within the 6 months of coming, he caught a chill and died. She said it straight, she didn't say it for comic effect. Because Michael, if you're called Summerwear, you cannot wear a heavy coat.
Talking of Jamaica, you go with your mum to Jamaica.
Yeah, but let me just finish.
Oh God, I'm sorry. I thought
So almost finished. So they have these names as kind of vague, but also they have these names, these nicknames, because they fear obia. You know about obia?
Yes.
Because if I want to do you harm, the obia man says, find out my name, find out my name, his real name. His name probably not Michael, I mean some other name. Find his real name, and then take his name, write it on a bit of paper, put the paper in the heel of your shoe, and then you have dominion over him. You can do with him what you want. So if you give a nickname, you have no fear of the obia.
That's good. Yeah. So, talking of obia, we go to Jamaica.
We go to Jamaica.
We go to Jamaica with your mum,
Yeah.
and part of it is to make a radio programme, but also it's an exploration for you.
Not just with my mum, with Jo, my partner, my blouse, and Jazz, my daughter. She's 2 then. She's grown up a bit since then.
Yeah, she is.
And we're going to go back to Jamaica because my mum, since arriving in Britain in '59, has never gone back. And that we're around the 80s. But she's always, every Friday we'd get this newspaper called the Jamaica Gleaner. And on the back of the Gleaner, there'd be adverts of plots of land you could buy and architectural drawings of houses you could build. And every Friday, the Gleaner would arrive in the house, and my mum would take a pencil and go right to the back of the paper, and she'd ring that advert. We're going home, but we never went home.
And she's got the grip on top of the wardrobe.
She's got the grip, the suitcase on top of the wardrobe, ready to go. She's ready to go. She's been ready to go all the time that she's arrived, but she's never gone back. And you know, 5 just becomes 10, 10 becomes 15, and before you know, you're changing the wallpaper. When you change the wallpaper, a heavy investment. When you change the wallpaper, you know that you are here to stay.
That's what Boris thought.
We're playing snooker now. I set them up and back in the hole, back in the net, like boom. But I know that she's always yearned to go. So I've had a kind of an interesting time with the BBC. Most of the time it's been great, but there's been a few moments where it's not been so great, which are in the book. But in this moment, I convinced the BBC, I think might even be Anne who might have let me go.
Anne, who's here. Wave to Anne, everybody. There's Anne.
Props to Anne, respect to Anne. Anne said, you want to go and have a holiday in Jamaica with your mother? Sure, go. So the idea is to go back to Jamaica and chart the impact of arriving in a place he hadn't seen for 35 years. And all through my childhood, my mother, I think, has been stymied by being in England. And I didn't realise the degree to which she's a flamboyant person, but in England she's rather constrained, rather reduced. Although she might recite Gunga Ding on a Saturday morning cleaning the house. You know, she's schooled in the romantic poets in Roger Kipling, all those guys, Yeats, Wordsworth. But when I thought of her, I think she would say that there was no real happiness in Britain. And she would just sort of stare at the walls and wonder what had happened to her, because she had great...
How old was she when she came?
She was 24 when she came, but she had great expectations for her life. And then she made a mistake and married this guy called Bad Guy, big mistake. And she would have been a middle-class woman in Jamaica. But when we landed in Jamaica, in Kingston Airport 35 years later, suddenly she was singing, she was dancing, she was being cheeky like you, she was interacting with people then, and she was haggling and hustling, and she was like an artist drawing on all the colours of the spectrum. Whereas in England, I thought she was like an artist painting in black and white. And I suddenly thought, ooh, what would it have been like if she hadn't left Jamaica? If she stayed, would she have been as vibrant and as vivacious as she was in those few weeks that I saw when we went to Jamaica 35 years later? So sometimes I think people, they have one narrative of migration. Migration is to come to this wonderful place where you can better yourself.
Yeah.
And it's a story of whether you're going to be successful or not, which is true. But the other narrative is, what sacrifice do people make to come here? What do they leave behind? And I think that they traded the kind of financial security, maybe educational security, for emotional wealth. And so I take my hat off to my mum and to Baghdad as well, and all those people who made that calculation that actually, despite confining themselves to maybe a miserable life in terms of the splendour of what they're used to, they're going to make their children's life better.
And she kind of teases herself with the possibility. She looks around, you know, could she live up here in this place and where there are mosquitoes and it's a bit cooler and this guy sort of flirts with her and so on. But in the end, she gets back on the plane and comes home and has never left, has she?
She hasn't
in fact, she's come and lived near you in Brighton.
Yeah, I'm the magnet.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little secret. I'm one of 7 children, and I wonder whether have you got siblings?
I've got one. One died, but I got one. Yeah.
So, you know, in the modern way, people have these sort of circles, sort of connectivity, WhatsApp groups, or they might have a kind of closed group on email. So I've got siblings who have a kind of a connection with my uncle Castus, is in the book, and inadvertently I'm not in the circle. Inadvertently I got included in one of these emails. They copied me in wrongly, and I was outed as the special one.
Oh, right. So that
wasn't a compliment.
No, you're, as it were, the snobby one to one side. You're the one who thinks he's too big for...
The one who thinks you can avoid disciplinary hearings just by saying, that's not me, you've got the wrong person.
Well, on that note, we'll end our chat for the time being and open it up to the floor. So please, folks, any questions? We do have a mic, if people want a mic, or if you've got a nice loud voice, do shout.
Colin.
Yeah, at the back.
Michael.
Yeah, Colin could be in control. Yeah.
Okay.